You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. As always, we are always looking for high-quality guest suggestions, not just high-quality suggestions, but high-quality guests that you suggest. Anyway, you can go to securityweekly.com/guest. Tell us who you want to hear on the show via that site, and we do a review regularly, and we get people on the show. If you want to come on the show, it's a great way to do that, get you in the system, and love to talk about all things hacking and InfoSec. As Chief Information Security Officer at Ping Identity, Robb Reck is responsible for ensuring the integrity of all products Ping creates, the confidentiality of sensitive data, and the availability of critical services. No small task. In addition, Robb is an active member of the Colorado security community and co-founded Colorado Equals Security podcast in 2017. Robb, welcome to the program.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
In your beautiful outdoor setting in beautiful sunny Colorado. I love it.
Yeah.
So Robb, I first have to apologize. I had Alex on about a year ago, and it's taken me this long to get you on the show. So I have to just apologize because I was on one of the early Colorado Equals Security podcasts. So
you finally completed the whole set. So once you get us both, you've basically done everything.
There you go. We've come full circle.
Yes.
So Matt, identity is your thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so let me set up the kind of preamble for this, Robb. I'm a big believer that there's three types of security controls that transcend anywhere infrastructure runs, right? Call it digital transformation, call it the workforce replacement with COVID, whatever. Applications, identity and user, and data security. And, I've been wanting to talk a long time about identity and kind of what are the trends we're seeing when it comes to enterprise identity in this concept of both digital transformation, where we're moving infrastructure from on-prem into the cloud, but now you couple that with remote workforce where employees are no longer on-prem, they're potentially in their homes working. What's happening in the enterprise identity space?
Oh, man, there's so much going on there. I think you're right. It's one of those, it's a pivotal technology. And what I mean by that is there's so many different things you can do. And there's not a lot that you can do without having identity as a part of it if you want to do it well. Getting the, starting off with customer experience, right? Where right in the middle of COVID, you're seeing this massive shift away from brick and mortar that, we've been seeing for 20 years, but the acceleration we've seen over the last, 4 or 5 months has been staggering. High-end retailers who are doing curbside pickup, and you have things like DoorDash and Grubhub that are kind of getting in between restaurants and their customers and causing these negative impacts. This customer experience, customer identity has become like the most important thing that I think we in security either need to get in front of to help do it the right way, or the business is going to solve that problem without us, and it's going to happen in a way that we'll be less happy about.
Yeah, and I mean, we know how important identity is, but identity's had this, I think, this interesting, I don't want to say issue, but identity's been like an IT problem and not really a security function, but it's starting to be known as a security issue. I mean, there's some interesting dynamics that happen with identity and who owns it and who's responsible for it, not only internally, but to your point, external customers as well. And so is there more of a focus now from the security aspects of identity than just the IT, I need to enable my users side?
Yeah, Matt, it's a great question. When I think about the kind of the history of identity, I would argue that it's older than security as a standalone discipline. I'm a security guy for 20 plus years. I've been in identity for the last 4.5 or so. So, I definitely came in kind of thinking of from a security mindset. But the deeper I get into this, the more I realize identity is just built into everything you do. And frankly, most of the time it's built in pretty poorly. It's built in with a just make it work mindset. And the reason that I agree, there's a dynamic with kind of pushing from identity just being an IT function of, just make it work to being a security function is because we see what are the negative trickle down effects of just make it work. Well, we have way too much access. We end up seeing when ransomware. I know I heard the last session a little bit. When ransomware hits, if you haven't done identity well, you're going to see a whole lot more impact from that, right? People who have the ability to encrypt, shared drives and other areas that really, if we had been using least privilege, if we'd been using these kind of principles of identity and security as we did it, it would have mitigated, would have reduced the impact of that. And then, of course, as security has become more important, we look at, well, how can we enforce? I think you did a great job talking about how do we kind of think about the types of controls that matter. Identity is right at the top of that list. Yes, I want to know where my most important data is, and I want to secure that data, and then I want to make sure I secure who has access to it. So I think security is putting their hand up and saying, hey, I want to be more involved with identity. IT is saying, hey, this identity stuff is hard. And frankly, most of the time it kind of gets in the way of a good user experience. So, we're looking for ways to improve that user experience, both from workforce and for customers, and do so in a way that reduces risk. There's a lot we can dive into there, and I'm happy to. We can get into passwordless, we can get into zero trust, get into intelligence. All of those are these trends that are making identity, number one, better for users, and number two, more secure.
Agreed. So let's dig into a couple of those, right? Let's go zero trust for a second, because zero trust is interesting. Zero trust, the term has been around for a long time, but it was primarily thought of as a network thing. Network segmentation, create microsegmentation in your network, don't trust these different segments. But as the perimeter has continued to dissolve and evaporate, that endpoint, that perimeter is shifting, right? Identity, applications, I think the interaction of how users interact with the application and the data is really where zero trust needs to move. And I'm starting to finally see, solutions that are looking at the identity and aspects of the identity application interaction as this new kind of emergence of a zero trust environment. Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'll say, kind of backing up, a big part of the reason I chose to come to Ping, and I was an enterprise CISO before going to work for them, was, I had always recognized that the firewall, perimeter-based, VPN-based stuff didn't work very well. And when I came over and talked to Andre, the CEO and founder of Ping, about what is his vision, and he kind of articulated for me how we use identity to take the place of what network you're connecting from, and we do so in a way that's intelligent and kind of leverages your cell phone. That's but all of us have all the time. That got exciting to me, and it was shortly after that I got to meet John Kindervag, who I'm sure you've had him on the show in the past, the creator of the zero trust networking concepts, and I sat down and really got to learn, and as we discussed it, that it became very clear to me that, well, yes, the idea is we're going to remove any trust that you have based on what network you're connecting from, but you have to say, what are you going to replace it with? It's not we're just removing that trust. We're replacing that trust with something else, and very clearly at least one very large component of that is identity. You can have other things, and when you look at Google's Beyond Corp stuff and other models out there, it does include other things, right? It also includes like device posture, a lot of controls on the resource that you're accessing. But identity is front and center, highly assured, and really continuously authenticated identity is a key part of zero trust. And I think that we've seen over the last few months that while a lot of companies kind of dip their toes into zero trust, the work from home shift and the need to go buy a whole bunch of new VPN concentrators and a whole bunch of new laptops has really pushed organizations to embrace this and move a lot more quickly. And honestly, like, it's even accelerated ours within Ping, where we've gone a long way down that road. But once you no longer have anyone in the office, if everyone's working remotely, I ask questions like, why do we have a corporate network? What's the purpose of this if everyone can get access remotely? It gives us a chance to really challenge some of those built-in assumptions.
Yeah, aligns to my 2015 strategy, Paul. Remember, I just had a Wi-Fi access point in the corporate network and everything else was in the cloud. And the question was, how do you secure that environment? And you're right, Rob. Identity plays a huge part of this, and it's not just human identity. I think there's also aspects of machine-to-machine identities. We think about we move stuff into the cloud. We have different services communicating to different services, different machines. I mean, identity takes on a whole new, broader context here, and not just human identity. I think machine identity plays a big part of this as well.
Well, and it's not just machines, right? It's applications and services, right? When we get into cloud native, that's like all you're left with, basically, right? Is how do these applications and services trust each other, and what should they trust? And I think that the shining example of that is, the open S3 bucket. That's me creating a service and basically trusting the world, or not, trusting everyone with that data. And how do we get control on that is things that are interesting to me.
Yeah, and that goes, Paul, over to when I think of my own personal model for zero trust, and I haven't seen it put anywhere else this way, but I really think there's three components. There's the number one starts with your laptop or whatever your connecting device is, right? I want to have some level of assurance that that device that you're connecting from isn't owned, so that we're not screen scraping everything that you view, everything you access. So that starts off at endpoint security. I don't think it's ever going away. The next is identity, and who is this person? How confident am I in this person? What do they want to have rights to? And there's probably, you can add a lot of intelligence, by the way, at that level, where we say, if they're connecting at weird hours, we're going to do additional step up. If all the patterns look good, we're going to let them in without a password at all. But there's identity in the middle. And then the third one is this tier, the security kind of called the web access security stuff. And that's where I would put things like, how do you make sure your S3 bucket isn't open to the world? How do I make sure that, a configuration mistake or frankly, just a vulnerability, 0-day vulnerability in one of my applications doesn't actually open me up to someone being able to go raw to it on the internet. And I think that always means you're going to have some kind of a reverse proxy. You're going to have something, in between the world and that resource to catch those things and be that defense in depth around any of those important resources.
Yeah, and on the application side, I mean, it comes down to what I think of as traditional hardening of a Linux or Windows system, right? But now you have to harden your application, because when you move into the cloud, it can very quickly lose that machine, right? And it's really just your application or your code or your service running somewhere. And how do you harden that? So, and I think it's a great point, Rob. What if it is compromised, right? What does it, how have you limited its access and monitored its access to revoke it if it does become compromised? Also limit the exposure if it does become compromised by limiting its access to, it only has access to this S3 bucket. It can only pull this key and make these API calls, right?
Yeah. And I'll say, I do think, I don't want to undersell how important it is to have some kind of a proxy in between for the sake of, there's a new CVSS, 9 to 10 every week, right? And these are important things. And when you saw, was it Elastic that had one recently basically saying any expired token could be used forever, getting access to the system. If all you had was Elastic raw on the internet, that you were vulnerable for a significant amount of time that folks could get in there. However, if you have, in our case, we use an access proxy in front of that system that's going to make sure that it is checking those tokens before it passes it on into the application. So you'd really have to have two vulnerabilities stacked together. Similarly, you can use a WAF for some attacks. You can use
API Gateway. Honestly, API Gateway does some of that, right? Like AWS.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, API Gateway, and then in all of these tiers, from endpoint to IAM to the web resource security, all of them are getting better with intelligence right now, right? And I'm not a big fan of buzzwords, and I'm not going to say it's AI. It's certainly not AI at this point from everything I've seen, but all of them should be getting to the point now. All those tiers, your vendor should be giving you machine learning to say, what does normal look like? What does a normal Robb session look like? And if something starts to look weird, we can step up your identity. We can send an alert to the SOC. We can terminate that session and make you start over. And I think that gets to your point that if all of a sudden you leave an S3 bucket open and we have a lot of folks go into it, well, our pattern for how S3 bucket access looks doesn't have everyone in the world hitting it. Folks from China and Russia getting in there. Let's have some kind of a sanity check on that kind of access.
Yeah, no, I like and you're right. AI is, we overuse it's not true AI, but in the S3 bucket, right? If someone does create one or change access, there's automation that you can do in the cloud that's really awesome to just take that S3 bucket, move it somewhere else, revoke access, and set off a chain of events, basically based on behavior that you define as this is insecure, right?
Yeah, and I think that the best control for that is immediately turn it off as soon as it gets created. I know it's much more challenging if you're coming through on a quarterly basis or a couple times a year and looking for open S3 buckets,
right?
Because then it's really hard to turn it off, right? You just killed some functionality that the business expected to work.
Yep.
Wait, we just failed closed. Wait, we just stopped somebody from doing something.
Exactly. Yeah, and you don't have to remove the data. What I like about the automation that you can use, especially in the cloud, is I can just move it to, another VPC or move it somewhere else where the data is still preserved, but you've just closed down access, sent an alert to a team to say, hey, you can't do that, right, and trigger events.
Yeah, and the really advanced companies have this configured with their change management database where they can, look for, is there a change that was supposed to have, an open S3 bucket? If no, then fail. If yes, celebrate because we successfully did what we needed to do there. That's I don't know a lot of companies that do it, but I think if you can get yourself to that point, you're really ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rob, there's two nirvanas I think in the identity space we haven't fully realized yet. You talked about one of them a little bit. This concept of passwordless authentication. What are we seeing with passwordless authentication capabilities? How are we getting closer? Where are we with that? And then I'll address the last one as our last hurrah for the session.
Yeah. So passwordless is a fantastic topic. I wish we could rename it to something else because I don't think that you're basically setting it up as a binary, right? Either you have no passwords or you've not achieved passwordless. The way we've named it. The way I think of passwordless is really a maturity spectrum. And we start off with, hopefully no one's there anymore, but this system where every system in your organization has its own unique password and you're having to sign in everywhere separately. And, there's these phases along the way, right? First thing we do is we create a single authentication authority, whether you use Active Directory or Ping or whoever else as the one site that says, okay, we sign in this one place and it's going to be, going to give you access everywhere. You can have single sign-on and federation as a part of that, depending on where you are. Once you have single sign-on, you can start doing some really cool stuff. Like you can make really long-lived sessions. So we're not passwordless altogether, but we have a lot less passwords. We can also make it so, of course, that's tied to a browser. So you get this long session from this one browser. You're in there for even 30 days, if that's a risk-appropriate thing for you to do, and you're starting to make the user experience better. Right? Each step is a better user experience without trading off security. One thing that we've done within Ping, like our corporate internally, is I've reversed the password and then MFA process. So what I mean by that is, you're going to sign into your session, your single sign-on for whatever duration, call it a month, and you're going to have your username and password, and then your MFA, which is like a device. And then from then on, for the next month, as long as you're signing into that same browser, and as long as you haven't done anything risky, you don't ever have to put in a password again. You're just going to do a swipe on your device to say, yes, this is still me, and you're going to get in. If someone tries to sign in as you from a different session, or they try and move your session cookie over to a different browser, it's going to fail. It's going to require you to do both of them. But the user experience in that case is pretty much passwordless for 90 or 29 out of 30 days, right? A much better experience. That's where I think is really achievable today, right? I'm there today, and I know a number of other companies that are there today. When I hear people going further is when we're kind of on the edge of what I've seen practically doable. Some companies have said they've got rid of passwords, but what they've really done is replaced it with a PIN, so a really weak password. But that still exists, and from a user perspective, it is better than a complex, call it 10-character password. FIDO2 WebAuthn. That's really the promise for us to get to a passwordless environment. It's still going to have passwords. You're still going to have something sitting in Active Directory or whatever your directory is, most likely. But from a user perspective, that token that they use, the FIDO authenticator, is going to be able to provide that authentication and get you in. I think on the back end, it's pretty similar in terms of managing. But in the short term, there's a lot of places it just doesn't work yet, right? What we really need is we need all of the browsers and all of the device manufacturers to support FIDO2 authentication. And when they do, we'll get a lot closer. I know Apple just announced, what was it, just a couple of weeks ago, right, that they're going to be moving toward at least a version of FIDO support here in Q3, Q4. So looking forward to seeing if that'll actually get us closer to being truly passwordless.
That's great. So here's the last one. Where are we with the concept of a universal ID? Because I think this is one of the other big challenges, especially when we talk about the customer side, the consumer side, right? Yeah. I am multiple identities. I'm Muldermania, I'm Mad at, I have a lot of them, right? Are we any closer to figuring out some aspects of a universal ID that can be federated and used and simplify aspects of this?
Yeah, Matt, that's a great question. I would love to talk about this as long as you guys have the time to, because I don't. There's no right or wrong answer on this. The challenge with the right now is it's not technical in nature. It's a trust issue, and who can you trust that you want them to have not only your identity but everyone else to know and be able to kind of track that back to that central identity. Is it the federal government? Is it your employer? I think everyone has some folks that they trust, and just about everyone doesn't trust in either of those two all the way, right? So we have to decide, how can you do that? The only place that I see we'd be able to trust that identity to be managed by is by ourselves, right? We call it self-sovereign identity. The ability for me to own my own identity and to be able to use that to authenticate, along with only giving what attributes I think are worth sharing. So if I go to the liquor store or I go to the bar, I want to prove to them that I'm 21. I want to say, here's a virtual identity that shows I'm 21 and shows you nothing else about me. That seems like, if you could prove that that's doable, I think that folks could start to support that. But what you're missing is any kind of endorsement or provability other than Robb made these claims. So you need the ability for, like, the state of Colorado to say Robb is endorsed to drive a motorcycle on the roads of the state. Okay, well, that's an important endorsement that I need to be able to share. So you need this kind of combination of self-sovereign identity that has endorsements by other folks, that has, by Ping Identity to say Robb is an employee here, and we can use this as proof of that identity. I'd say that the technology's in place, and Ping's been working on some fun stuff around self-sovereign identity and the ability for us to kind of share claims about ourselves without having to share the entire thing. But it is a really big bootstrapping problem. How do you get the world to adopt this? I'll say the way we're doing it right now is we're working with some of our customers to basically just create their own identity. And a good example is the state of Colorado. If you're a Colorado resident, the My Colorado app is like basically a virtual identity. You have your driver's license on there, and the idea is you're going to be able to do more and more services on there going forward. As of today, you can use it to renew your driver's license, to get like insurance, and I think you can actually use it to apply for jobs in the Colorado government system. But they're creating an ecosystem around their own identity, and I think that's a really important step. But at some point, we want to have it go away from, hey, I have my one virtual Colorado identity, and I also have my one virtual federal identity, and really find one. And I think that the only two workable ways to do it are going to be the federal government kind of mandates it, and we all go there. And of course, EFF is all up in arms. I'm sure they'd be up in arms about that as a proposal, or we find a way to do self-sovereign identity.
Just fascinating to hear you talk through that, right? Because we've talked about this concept for a long time, but to think through, can I, as a person, have the ability to own my own identity and use that across these different places? You bring up some very interesting challenges, because I don't think a lot of us trust the government to do it well for us. I mean, we've seen other, aspects of identities and personal data being breached at state and federal levels. But, if I could create my identity and use it at the state and federal level, I think that's a very interesting concept. So
there are some countries that are doing it. I mean, I can't personally speak to how well, but some folks that live in those countries say they are doing it well. And so there are examples. I think we tend to focus on the U.S. because that's where we're all from, right? But looking at it globally, there are countries that have instituted a global identity system, and it seems to be working from what I've heard. Rob, I don't know if you've looked at any
Paul,
of the systems.
that's a great point. There are countries out there that have done a good job. I think Finland is.
Yes.
It's either Finland or Denmark. I think Finland.
I think
is
it's
at the top of the list.
Or was it Norway or both? Yeah, I get geography.
The Nordics somewhere. But the challenge is, population and kind of just the diversity of the U.S. versus some of those other countries. It is it's a much smaller government. I think that they've done a good job there, but we've seen more examples of countries who've not done a great job of it. I know India is a good example of it, or I suspect that China probably has a single identity for everyone. They just don't know it at this point. But that's probably rolled out across their entire government as well.
Right.
And we just have different dynamics, right? We're going to have the privacy advocates here who just will not have it, right? And
right.
I'm not sure.
It's like, you mentioned EFL. Like, who do I trust with my identity? Do I trust the government? Do I trust Amazon or Google or Facebook? Yeah. Like, really, I don't trust any of them with my identity, to be honest.
I don't know about you guys. Like, right now, like the way we solve this problem, Matt, you started the whole thing with like, how do I get that one identity? We solve it by saying, all right, well, you can federate your Amazon identity, your Google identity, your Facebook identity. And I don't know about you guys. I have accounts at all three of those platforms, and I use those different identities for different use cases when someone wants me to federate.
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to federate, like, if it's a bank, like Facebook's gonna have nothing to do with that.
Right. Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah.
Anything I actually care about. But if it's a throwaway, like let's say I'm signing up for a video game on my phone, like, oh yeah, Facebook, go for it. That's the throwaway identity that I'm happy to have, used for junk purposes. But if it's a real thing, right? Well, that's probably my Google identity. That's the one that I'm. Right. It already has access to my email. I kind of figured that's the one I have to trust.
But that's the problem we have today is we have so many identities, right? Because I've got the Xbox, Microsoft one is the one that I struggle. Turns out I had a couple of accounts there, and the wires are getting crossed and all that stuff on top of the Google and Facebook and the Amazon identities as well.
And if we go back to that whole self-sovereign identity idea, remember that the reason that Facebook is so happy to let you use their identity for you and other services is because they get all this knowledge about you as a result.
Exactly.
Right? It's power. And so if you think, well, what does self-sovereign identity change? Well, it changes where the power sits. Now, I'm the one who's giving that identity out, and I'm the one who's getting back, and I'm choosing to share my activity with marketers, or I'm not.
Right.
I'm choosing to let this game know who my list of friends is, or I'm not. Whatever that looks like, we're taking the power back, and the ability for me to, on a claims base, right? I'm going to make a specific claim, and you're going to ask me specifically, what are the attributes you want to know about me? And I can say yes or no. Like, that's powerful. And when we can get to that place, we're going to have a much more privacy centric approach to this. It's just a big haul, right? The bootstrapping problem once again. We got to figure out a way to get people to actually start using it.
Yes,
Matt?
I agree. No, this was great. I love the conversation, Rob. I appreciate you coming on in short notice to, update us on the identity space.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, man, this is great. Hey, I want to throw out one more thing. We're right in the middle of the biggest identity conference of the year. It's an industry conference, not a vendor conference, called Identiverse. It's generally happens in person in the summer because of, obviously, with COVID, it's gone to virtual, and they've actually spread it over 8 weeks. So it's happening right now. I think it's basically through the middle of August-ish. A lot of good sessions there. It's free because when they moved to virtual, they also made it free. So anyone who wants to sign in and learn about some identity stuff can. Now, as I moved over from a enterprise to working at an identity company, I recognized that what I learned at a security conference is totally different than what I learned at an identity conference. If you don't know what OpenID Connect are and SAML and all these different FIDO, if you don't know these acronyms, this is a good place for you to go learn about them. And I'll throw a little bit of a teaser out there. They have Henry Rollins, the head man for Black Flag and Rollins Band, as he's kind of hosting it this year and doing some interviews. Obviously, super interesting, compelling stuff going on there, and it's all free and it's available to stream after the fact. You don't have to watch it live either.
Sweet. Well, Rob, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
All right, guys, have a great one.
With that, we will conclude the show for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.